Holly Reed, a junior at Paul College and a senior marketing strategist with Voice C Digital. I'm pleased to introduce our final speaker to the podium. As the research director for the UNH Sales Center and a member of the marketing faculty at the Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics at the University of New Hampshire, Dr. Cinthia B. Satornino brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the stage. Her academic journey is nothing short of remarkable, with an MBA from the University of Florida and a PhD from Florida State University. As an associate editor for the Journal of Business Research and a prolific author, she has co-authored numerous award-winning publications in prestigious academic journals, such as Forbes, Big Think, The Conversation, Psychology Today, and Fast Company. Today, Dr. Cinthia B. Satornino will be our guide in navigating the complex terrain of the marketing ethics frontier as she explores the perks and pitfalls of artificial intelligence. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to the esteemed Dr. Satornino.
Thank you so much for having me. I've never been accused of needing a microphone, but I've been told I need one. We'll see how this works. I'm Italian, I talk with my hands, I move around a lot, so we'll see how it goes. So yes, those questions leading into or exiting out of the last discussion were an excellent lead-in to the conversation we're gonna have. So hopefully, thank you for setting me up. It's like you knew. So thank you for asking those questions, and hopefully I shed some light on this. But first, I just want to remind everyone of the old adage that there's no such thing as an original idea, right? We all take, and as an artist, I take great exception to that, but we all receive inspiration from a lot of different places, right? And so I always tell my students who are worried about, will I have a job in marketing? Is AI taking over marketing? And I always say, look, what AI can do is regurgitate in new combinations things that already exist. What makes you valuable is that you can imagine things that don't exist. And that is the value that you bring that with AI, partnered with AI, can really elevate, accelerate the innovation of humanity, not eliminate it or replace you. There's no replacement for the human imagination. So, all right, so now, well, that was my little, but now we'll get into the actual thing. How did I get involved in artificial intelligence? I am a sales researcher. I study organizational sciences. I think about how the customers and the firm interact. And all of a sudden, I started noticing that AI was becoming ubiquitous very quickly. And I was like, whoa. What is happening here, right? And of course, the same panic that marketers working in advertising or working in data science also felt, which is, oh my gosh, am I gonna have a job? There's all these articles that come out like, we don't need salespeople anymore, we have AI. So of course, I got very curious and started digging into it. And yes, it is true that there are a lot of benefits that come from AI for sales. One of the greatest examples I saw was one where there was somebody, you call somebody to get help for something or to find out more about a product. And a company offers imagine dual screens. You're talking to your person on a chat. On their second screen, oops, see, told you it wasn't gonna work. On their second screen, they have an AI-enabled algorithm and helper that is analyzing the sentiment of the person who's talking, the way that their text comes in, whether it seems angry or upset or excited or nervous or uncertain, and it's given the context and the sentiment of the words, is providing guidance for the salesperson. Now, is that a perfect interpretation of the other person on the other side of that chat's sentiments? No, you need that intermediary human that understands how to translate some of the nuances in a way that's very difficult to train. And so it becomes a tool that enables that inside salesperson who's handling something that the customer needs, a way to help them do better for that customer. And that's great. So I see a lot of positives, and a lot of people here talked about the positives, hinted at some of the negatives, but also talked a lot about the positives. There's a lot of promise in AI. And for those of you who are nervous about it, we've been using AI since like the 70s, right? This is not a new thing. When your texts were completed on your Google search 5 years ago, that was a form of artificial intelligence, predictive, right? That the foundations of current generative AI is based on. So first of all, it's not new, but I'm someone who is inclined to be interested in examining not just the bright side of things. I'm by nature an optimist, so I'm always fascinated by the dark side of things. My most recent research was studying organizational psychopaths, if that gives you any idea of my fascination with the dark side. And of course, as I'm reading all these great things, I was like, what is the downside of this? And so recently, my co-authors and I created a typology. Okay, here are the things from a business to consumer perspective and a business to business perspective. Here are the good and the bad, right? Let's quantify this so we can talk about it. Let's give them names so we can talk about it. And so some of the things we know and were talked about by your speakers here about the benefits of AI, you can probably identify along those green sort of labels there, right? Those probably fall under some of those categories. But at the time that this was written 2 years ago, so much has happened in 2 years in AI, right? It was actually written 3 years ago, published 2 years ago. I was like, wait, but let's talk about some of these negative things. Let's examine, let's not go in blindly. Let's be realistic about what AI also could do for consumers and for businesses. And so I'll give you an example. I'm not going to read through these, but I'll give you an example for each of the dark side ones. So one of the issues in the use of AI in business to consumer environments is that concern about uniqueness neglect, right? So you're not going to know who I am. You're basing it on who you think I am, but you're not going to know who I am. And a classic example is Apple's lending policy. At one point, they had some AI-enabled algorithm to help them determine the creditworthiness and credit limits for applicants. They did not feed this algorithm gender, but women were typically given significantly lower credit limits than men. Well, some might argue, well, that just tells you the data says women aren't as creditworthy. But you might not remember, some of you, many of you in this room, might not realize that it wasn't so long ago that women couldn't sign financial contracts, that the amount of financial data available is limited for women and also full of sort of the constraints we know exist for different genders, right? In terms of access to control over their finances. Does that mean that the individual themselves is not creditworthy simply by existing in a female body? No, right? There are other circumstances. That's the issue of uniqueness neglect. Another classic example on the business-to-business side is this power asymmetry, which means one company in a business-to-business engagement is AI-enabled or has higher AI capacity than the other. You may have heard or read the news about Amazon at one point, and I think they've curved this practice as people became aware of it, but they were taking the data from their third-party sellers, identifying products that were selling really, really well, and then creating their own in-house version to sell and compete with their very own sellers. That's a classic example of power asymmetry and concerns regarding opportunism. Okay? Now, so just to give you, if you want to read the paper, I'm happy to share. But you've got the gist of it, that basically we were just trying to categorize and understand what was the positives and negatives of AI so we could start talking about and mitigating the concerns. So you might think, well, yeah, those are classic examples, but we've learned from them. Okay, I'm gonna talk about AI and image generation. This was yesterday that came across my newsfeed. By the way, a lot of these are from like 2 days ago, because it's like drinking from a fire hydrant to get interesting stories about what AI is doing, or people running and using AI, because people are at the source of this, right? Don't forget that. So AI has a hotness problem. When you ask AI to generate an image for you, whether it's a tree house, it's gonna be a beautiful tree house, or it's gonna be a janky, falling down tree house that's a mess that is not gonna work. It's the extremes, right? So when you ask AI to generate, and this was an actual, I love those BuzzFeed listicle articles that are like, what AI thinks every resident of every state looks like. I'm obsessed with those. I watch them all the time. So when you ask them what the residents of New Hampshire look like, whew, hot, right? Wow, every state, so hot. Well, that's funny, right? It is, it's hilarious, but also kind of problematic. Because as marketers, we know we're already dealing with teenagers and a teenage mental health crisis where they're comparing themselves to real people with better lighting and good angles. Imagine if they're competing with something that doesn't even exist. That's a significant social impact, right? So funny, but also, ooh, how can we fix this? This is a problem, right? Now you might think, well, yeah, but that has to do with like, fashion and advertising, and okay, we can just feed in some ugly people, right? I don't believe there's ugly people. In fact, by the way, the reason why they're so attractive is because if you were to average everyone in the room, the average is always more attractive than the individuals. So that's why you get hot people. So I think everybody has something to contribute to that beauty, but you might think, that's just like fashion advertising or an Instagram problem, not really my problem. Well, what if you were to ask AI, and this was an article that was provided by one of the lovely organizers who knew what I was talking about and said, oh, you gotta see this article. AI was asked to create an image of Black African doctors helping white children. Now, mind you, the prompt that you use is so critical to what comes out, right? So the human is in there, right, too. But they didn't just type Black Africans treating white kids. When that didn't work, and the things that came out of it, they started getting much more specific, right? And the more specific they got, the worse the images got. The closest they could get to Black African doctor treating white children was Black children dressing up as doctors. Horrifying, right? Why? Because the AI is evil and taking over the world? No, it's because it's trained on pictures, millions and millions of pictures that don't depict Black doctors serving white children. But we know they are. I've had Black doctors. We know they exist. Why? Marketer's problem, right? Just like hotness problem, marketer's problem. Okay, I know this seems like doom and gloom. I promise it'll get better. But here's some other ones. You might be thinking to yourself, well, this is all an advertising problem. I don't work in advertising. There's nothing this isn't relevant to me. Okay, well, what if you're interviewing for a job? I think a lot about sales management and hiring the right people for the right jobs in sales, right? So, one of the challenges with using AI in hiring is that it marks neurodivergent behavior as negative. Now, considering that the estimates are that 20% of the population exhibits some form of neurodivergence. I'm neurodivergent, I'm ADHD. If you've ever talked to me, that is no surprise to you whatsoever. But individuals who exhibit like fidgetiness, me, individuals who have difficulty making eye contact, you have AI that will indicate your state of mental health and your fitness for a job based on things that have nothing to do with your fitness for the job, right? That's scary. You're like, hey, I work for a small company, or I work for a big company, or this isn't really everywhere. Recently, Amazon, I'm picking on Amazon, sorry. I like Amazon, I have a problem with Amazon. My husband works for Amazon, so I need to be careful. But clearly academic, not biased towards, okay, so Amazon had an AI system they were using to hire, and the hiring of women, the AI algorithm did not like women. Why do you think that is? Do you think the algorithm was biased? Any thought about why that might be? Oh my gosh, yes, we can have a whole symposium on the differences in experiencing a female body versus a male body, right? Absolutely, yes. So there are times that maybe we have different levels of absenteeism. But is that the reason why the algorithm, thank you for offering that. Yeah, you're feeding in certain kinds of data. Yes, thank you, Diane. Yes. It thought it could pay them more. Yeah, you would have to pay women a lot more for all they bring to the table. No, just kidding. Yeah, for sure. There's probably some compensation factors in there. But think about it from what you know from things like Gamergate or like tech and women's experiences in tech. In general, women are incredibly underrepresented in technology. So to all the points that you allude, that data that's being fed in, how many female candidates were rejected from tech jobs? Is it the fault of the algorithm? It just spits out what we put in, right? If you're scared about something that AI is doing, go to the source, right? Okay, but you might be saying to yourself, like, the moral of that story is don't let AI choose your people. You need somebody in the intermediary. You need a human in the middle, right? Saying, wait, right? And thankfully, Amazon did get rid of that algorithm. But you might say to yourself, well, I own my own company. It doesn't matter. This doesn't affect me, right? All right, well, one last set for you to think about how it might affect you. So I told you that I was studying organizational psychopaths, right? So I read a lot about how companies think about these dark personality traits. It's actually psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellian. Could you imagine if you were trying to book an Airbnb for a vacation and you were denied the reservation? And you're like, why? Well, actually, Airbnb used an algorithm. Intentions are good, by the way. We want to assure our hosts that the people who are coming into their homes are not going to destroy their homes, right? Good intention on the part of the company. Also, people who are reserving, your host isn't going to be somebody you have to worry about, right? But what ended up happening is that they scraped data. You all are leaving digital breadcrumbs everywhere. Every interaction, every step you take, every website, trust me, it's somewhere, it's recorded, and it's being used to try to figure out who you are in ways you can't even imagine. Like determining whether or not you're a psychopath based on your publicly available data and denying reservations as a result. Could you imagine? Well, if you're like me and fed up with Airbnb anyway because your last few experiences have been terrible, you're like, meh, doesn't matter. I won't use Airbnb. It's really gone downhill. Sorry, Airbnb. Well, what if it's affecting your rent? On the positive, landlords are able to optimize the returns that they get from their rental properties by using artificial intelligence. Awesome. But the forces in the market that used to drive rents up and down and drive landlords to have full occupation of their rental spaces is actually now being redefined by algorithms that tell them, hey, you can optimize your rent. Don't fill that empty apartment. Instead, charge the people that are there already more. which has impact on whether you're a homeowner or a renter. With all these stories, you can see a good intention, right? You can see a good intention. Like this horrific story of this 8-month pregnant woman who opens the door, her front door, from a knock from the police, who find that she's been arrested, there's a warrant for her arrest, for carjacking based on facial recognition, where we know that camera equipment isn't actually designed to pick up the color of black and brown individuals. Horrific. So you could be minding your own business, and some facial recognition, which is notoriously terrible, could lead to you having to disentangle yourself from something like this, right? So, is the world ending? No. Now, mind you, the data that these algorithms are eating were created by people who thought it was a good idea to put a baby under a sun lamp, to give cocaine to children who have toothaches, or morphine, if they're being very fussy, or one of my favorite books from 1878, don't let your children play the flute or blow the bugle or any other wind instrument because they're going to hurt their lungs. This was real, believe things. I didn't make this up. Or holding your baby for anything other than feeding and cleaning would lead to the child becoming a spoiled tyrant. My son's here, so I'm gonna make a joke. I held my children all the time. They're still spoiled tyrants, so not really, he's great. But we now know, based on science, like psychology, understanding attachment theory, and the importance of handling babies while they're very young, we know that this is not a good idea, right? But we haven't combed through all the information in every book, copyrighted or otherwise, every image that has been fed to these machines, right? Has been fed to these algorithms. And the algorithms are they don't create horrors. They amplify our own biases back to us. What a gift. What a gift to eliminate blind spots for us, right? Because suddenly we see, oh God, that's terrible. We need to take more pictures. We need to properly represent what doctors look like. We need to improve the accuracy of face recognition technology before we go around arresting innocent pregnant women, right? So, is the world ending? Is it over? Sky is falling. Let's give up, turn it over to the algorithms, and crawl into our caves and wait for the apocalypse? Nope. There's actually a time when parents would protest. There would be warnings. I found one once, and now I can't find it again, so I wish I had it, but it had a poster of warning for parents that their kids, if they read too much, they weren't getting enough sun and they weren't outside. So reading and public libraries were horrible, and we needed to curb their reading. And after that, it was radio, right? Now it's, then when I was raising my kids and they were young, it was all tech, like screen time, right? But at least it was real people. Now it's AI people I've got to worry about, right? And instead, the very things that we were so afraid of for our kids back in the 1800s and 1900s, we wish they would read. We beg them to read. So let's make sure we keep it in perspective a little bit. The fact of the matter is we don't know if AI is taking over the world. The biggest issue is transparency. We can't see what these algorithms are doing or what they're fed on. Recently, an organization made up of scientists created an index of transparency. And 1 to 100, you could score the highest scoring, which sets itself on the cornerstone of its founding is transparency, only made a 50, and that was the highest. This also came out yesterday, if you're interested. In the Atlantic, I think. Might have been New York. It might have been Wall Street Journal. One of the issues is that we don't know what information is being fed to these algorithms so that the artificial intelligence is making the choices that it's making. And part of that is because that is proprietary. They're protecting their intellectual property. They invested a lot of money into doing that. into creating these algorithms, creating these AIs and these chatbots, AI-enabled solutions, right? So what can marketers do about this? Seems like a huge problem, just like everything that we're all facing, that your generation is facing. But the solution is always the same. How do you eat an elephant? You take a bite at a time. One great way to make sense of whether an algorithm, whether an AI solution is one that you should deploy is to think about it in terms of, one, your agency. You have some control over what happens. You have some control over the solutions you choose. Whether you're working for a company and making a choice, whether you're recommending something to your bosses, or you're running your own company, or whether you're using it as a consumer, you're making a choice, and it all starts with your choice. That is the greatest power that you have as an individual to change the world, and it is phenomenal. It's so powerful, right? But it's a huge problem, and it's a complex problem, so we take bites of it. You all are very familiar with this, I think. The UN SDGs. What it is, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals help you just break down big problems into smaller bites. And smaller bites under that, if you look at the targets, right? Helps you make sense of these problems. And so my co-authors and I recently created a decision-making model on how you think as a marketer, how you think about deploying an AI solution. Because those solutions, if you demand transparency so that you can make ethical decisions and you put your dollars or your company's dollars behind that, companies are forced to reveal their training. They're forced to compensate artists who have created amazing photographs that have trained. There's a big controversy, I'm sure you've heard of it, and somebody probably referenced it in the meeting, about authors not being compensated and finding out that some of these more commonly used algorithms were trained on copyrighted books. Well, you can require that from solutions. And then walking through, and I'm not going to go through this because if you want it, I'll send you the paper gladly. But it basically is an iterative system of decision making where you make sure not only to account for the thing you're trying to accomplish as a business, but also to account for how it would affect other aspects. So let's say that the solution you're trying to address is for responsible consumption and production, or actually the infrastructure one, right? Number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. That's what you're gonna do. You're gonna create stronger infrastructure, better industry, great. But what we know is that that doesn't exist in a vacuum, that all of the other aspects of sustainable development are likely impacted by what you're doing. And so identifying those interdependencies, such as using the example of Amazon's AI hiring, making sure that women aren't being excluded from your hiring model. Like, should I deploy an AI solution for hiring? Okay, yes, that will make me more efficient, right? But I need to make sure that it reduces inequalities, that it contributes to gender equity, that it considers the diversity of neurotypes in the world and doesn't penalize somebody. So following an ethical decision-making model, AI doesn't control us. We control AI. So yes, it can do some crazy, hilarious, horrifying, alarming things. No, it will not replace you. Because the reason why it can do horrible, horrifying, hilarious things is because of us, and it will stop doing that because of us. So, and that is, oh no, I pressed the wrong button and now it doesn't want to move. There we go. Thank you so much. That's it for me. All right, stand up here. They said don't move, so I'm staying here weirdly. Sorry. Hi.
So what would happen when, like, with the facial recognition stuff and people are falsely accused? Like, that's kind of scary. And how do you think that over time, as AI becomes more powerful, that they'll eventually come up with privacy laws about to the extent of which AI can be used, especially when it comes to like tracking?
I think so, and every time you log in with your Face ID, you're giving Apple a way, like you're adding to the Apple algorithm to be able to identify people. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying that that data refines the algorithms that then do facial recognition. I think the key is when you deploy. So that's what that model is all about, is like that's super scary. So why are these systems that are inaccurate being deployed? Right? We need to think about somebody, some human made a decision to use something that isn't 100% accurate, right? Nothing's 100% accurate, but at least 99.8 if you're talking about arresting people, right? So I feel like it's gonna get better. It's, I think, to some extent inevitable that we will use facial recognition in different ways, but I think if we can program the data, if we can use the data we feed to be more inclusive and more sensitive and really adjust some of the things that were broken, like, you know, the big problem with facial recognition technology specifically for brown and black individuals is that it has difficulty in recognizing distinguishing characteristics when the skin, and that was deliberately done. It was actually, marketers actually touted that as a great new innovation for camera technology, right? So we need to like, now start doing the same thing to optimize the tools. I don't know if that answers your question, but. Yes, and you actually tapped into something really important, which is we have a tendency to think because a computer told us or we see a video that it must be true. I can't think of a better way to show, nope, that's not the case than what you all demonstrated. These are all really good things, by the way, and not that part. I'm saying the tools are actually can be really valuable, right? So that's why I like to balance them with the benefits and the negatives, right? So you saw some of the beautiful things that you can do and some of the ways that companies can be more efficient, but we need to consider the interdependency of supporting the artist, right? We need to consider the interdependency of maybe we've been falsely accusing people way before AI. So that we could have a whole symposium on fixing the criminal justice system and technology, right? So I don't think it's a new problem, it's just a new iteration or a new manifestation of the same problem. There's lots to be fixed in that area, I think. Oh my gosh, I'm such a fan of blind hiring, like removing any cues. Yes, but again, I will steal a very witty answer that I would be wearing much better shoes as well if I had the solution to that answer. But I do believe very strongly in a blind review process for hiring, focusing specifically on the merits of the candidate. Yeah, for sure. Sienna, you thought of the solution. I feel comfortable. I feel very optimistic because I interact with students every day and I'm constantly in awe and amazed with the innovations that you come up with. The students in the room, I'm constantly in awe. And so for all the existential crisis I have in studying organizational psychopaths and the dark side of AI, I walk into my classroom and my students are creating these amazing projects on how to solve big world problems. And I'm like, we're in good hands. It's okay. We'll be okay. Oh, great. That I particularly appreciate since I'm part of the UNH community. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
So I'm interested in the parameters and how to properly set parameters for AI, and this might get a little bit more philosophical than it is business related. But
My favorite.
oh, there we go. Do you, or not do you, how do you think in the future we're going to govern setting parameters across multiple AI platforms, right? Because if ChatGPT, for instance, is going to set its own parameters for its program, should that be universal across other platforms? Do you think that there should be one governing body maybe that somehow can come up with the proper parameters for everything, or where do you think that's going to go in the future?
Oh, when you say one government with all the proper parameters, that makes my stomach hurt
I know,
a
same
little
here.
bit. I have a little bit of anxiety around that. But that's a really good question. And actually, in coming up with that model that I showed at the end that I didn't really get into in the technicalities of it, we actually reviewed 50, 20, more than 50, 70, maybe 100 ethical AI principles, right? And identified some commonalities across all of them. Like, we all agree there should be human oversight. We all agree that there should be transparency, that there should be accountability, that a company can't just go, oops, AI did it, not us, right? Because you have to have responsibility at the level of the company. However, we looked at things like the Department of Defense in the US and in the UK. We looked at housing and real estate. We looked at their ethical principles. We looked at companies that were creating computers and companies that were so every single industry, we try to get a good spread of it. And the challenge is that, yes, they all talk about accountability, they all talk about it a little differently, and they all talk about it in a self-interested way. So I don't think there's one answer. I think that there is an answer to be found in taking a general body of principles like accountability and having some way to customize that to the particular context you're talking about. Because based on that review and sample of one, I don't think one entity could really meet the needs across, one of the ones we did was the insurance industry is using AI a lot. So, you might be seeing in the news that Florida, insurance companies are moving out of Florida and out of California because their models tell them it's too risky to insure how are these homeowners, and oftentimes homeowners that are in impoverished areas, so how can that be the same governing principle that also governs whether or not we create this defense weapon or release this data? Also, we talk about transparency, but the US Department of Defense is likely to have very different transparency requirements than the insurance companies, right? So to answer your question, I think it's going to take not one body, but rather a coming together of a body, which is why I really like the idea of an organization like the UN, but for AI. That's me. Sample of one. Don't quote me on that. Gonna get myself in trouble, but I like the idea of multiple representatives being able to have that discussion based on my research.